The twins met 6 wild wolves and did what made the photographer cry out. A pregnant woman who passed out under a tree was shocked when she woke up to find she'd given birth to twins. Do you believe in miracles? If not, then this story is for you. Of course, most of you will have a hard time believing what I'm going to tell you today. Also, frankly, it's not surprising because the case is not science-friendly, and no one, even the most seasoned experts, can explain it. It would be hard to understand this astonishing story without eyewitnesses who spotted our protagonist and saw what happened. I'll tell you a story about a pack of wolves who rescued a pregnant woman with twins in the forest in winter. What happened to her shocked everyone. Our story takes place a long time ago in a remote village in Ukraine during a very cold winter when snow covered the ground and covered the trees in the nearby forest. In the village lived a young woman who was pregnant with twins. The young woman's husband, an avid fisherman, was on a long fishing trip on board. This is his last trip of the year, and since the bay is completely frozen over, he intends to spend a few days outside and catch as much as he can before leaving. The young woman's in charge of looking after the house at home, even though she's expecting twin babies soon. Also, how was she feeling before this exciting time in her life? The feeling of being a human being is deeply rooted in the psyche, and it's one of the fundamental facts of life that we can always depend on. I'm a human, and I'm alive, and I'm alone. For some women, these feelings go away the first time a little guy in your belly kicks in your stomach. When you see a miniature peanut on an ultrasound screen, it disappears even earlier. You suddenly have a little alien in your stomach who completely takes over your body, makes your brain cry over insurance ads, and makes you crave strawberries and lobster. You walk carefully so that a little alien doesn't fall off, and at one particular moment, you realize that a tiny intruder can communicate with you. If he's uncomfortable or surprised, he'll kick you in the ribs quickly, and if he hears his dad laugh, he'll kick you in the ribs too. When he gets too big, you feel like he's going to fall out of your ass any moment. The young woman is very strong and can live independently. She even walks miles in the woods every day to cook, clean, and drink water. She would fetch water at the end of the day to make sure she was back before the sun went down. After the sun goes down, it gets too cold to go outside in the forest, and there are dangerous animals to worry about on this particular day. Everyone in the village is talking about the overnight increase in wind, which usually means a big snowstorm is coming, and all the anglers will return home to be with their families. The young woman had heard all the talk of the storm, and she was excited because her husband was coming home that night. She put her hands on her belly and felt her body move. Oh, they'll be back soon, she thought. The twin babies were due soon, so the young woman started tidying up her room for her newborns. I guess she must be thinking that when my husband comes home from the cold, I'll make a hot stew for dinner so that we'll share a delicious hot meal, which is a better way to celebrate. So, after her day job, she went to the supermarket to buy ingredients for a stew. However, when she was in the supermarket, she felt a great movement in her stomach, and she gently touched her belly with her hands as if hearing the baby's voice again. The young woman knew that time was coming soon, but it was a good thing that her husband was coming home tonight. She paid for the ingredients, thanked the owner, and sent the food home. Once home, the young woman set out with a bucket to fetch water for the stew. Today was a little later than her usual departure time, but she was confident that if she made the most of it, she'd be able to get to the river and back before the sun went down and the snowstorm set in. So, with one hand clutching her bucket, the other rests on her pregnant belly. The young woman had made her way through the woods, and she reached the river with plenty of time to go home. So, when her belly started kicking and hurting, she took a moment to sit on a large rock by the water's edge. But the pain is more frequent, she said aloud to herself. Wait a little longer. But after a while, she realized she couldn't afford to wait. The young woman filled the bucket and started walking quickly towards her home in the village. She saw that the sun was starting to set, and she didn't have much time, so when her stomach started hurting again, she got over the pain. The pain came in wave after wave, and she endured it and kept going, but finally she couldn't take it anymore. The young woman flinched and yelled as her stomach cramped, and she slipped and fell on a rock in the road. She badly sprained her ankle and fell to the ground. Although she tried to protect her belly, the bucket splashed all over her as she fell on her side, completely soaking up her body and making her shiver uncontrollably. The young woman cautiously tries to stand up, but she cannot put any weight on her ankles. It was so painful that she could only lie on the ground. She could see the sun disappearing over the horizon. She could feel the air getting colder, the snow was starting to fall on her wet body, her heart was starting to beat wildly, and she knew if she didn't get help soon, she and her newborn baby will die in the cold. But she's brave enough not to give up, and she tries her best to crawl along the path to get back to the village. She yelled for help, but it was no use. She was so far from the village that everyone else hid in the house for the night. This time she cried out in pain again, and her stomach was relieved again. But then, as the howling of the 6 wolves drew nearer, she heard voices echoing through the woods that filled her with fear. The young woman stopped moving, trying to be as still as she could, curling up in a ball, trying to hide under her cloak, but knowing she was exposed to a path. She could only hope and pray that the wolf would pass her by. She needs a miracle, and she needs a miracle now. Just then, she felt a rush of heat on the back of her neck, and the wolf found her. The young woman said a quick prayer for her unborn child and braced for the worst. But at last, she suddenly fainted. Larissa didn't know how long she'd been in a coma. When she awoke, she saw the wolf beneath her, hugging her like a cushion. About 6 wolves remained with her. 2 or 3 minutes later, after licking and scraping all the matter and stains off her daughter, the mother wolf gently snouted the twins to her side. She gave birth to twins in the snow, and she was so happy to see her babies that she hugged them and started crying. She quickly breastfeeds them instead of attacking the wolves. And the wolf did the strangest thing. It stopped beside her in the snow, and the other wolves soon joined together to form a warm barrier of fur against the winter storm. Larissa felt so exhausted. She gained a breath of relief, but then flinched as the contractions in her stomach began to intensify, and she felt great pain again. It's not over yet. Her husband, who had returned to the village and returned to an empty house, and the fisherman knew that his wife must have gone out to fetch water but had not returned. But it was too cold and it was too dangerous to call in a search party to find her. He could only pray for her safety all night long. As soon as the sun came out, he went door to door calling friends and neighbors to help him search the woods. But as they stood by the tree line to go in, someone yelled, "Wait a minute, she's there!" The crowd fell silent, and the man rushed forward, unable to believe it was his young wife he saw. Striding through the woods, sitting beside her was a big, shaggy wolf. When the young woman with a package in her arms reached the edge of the woods with her wolf guards, the wolf howled and disappeared into the woods. The fisherman ran to his wife to say hello, and he smiled as he heard the twin babies in her arms rise from the wrap. The young woman smiled and pulled back a corner of the cloak, revealing the newborn child inside the cloak. The young couple never forgot the miracle, nor the wolf that saved the young woman and her twin babies, who they decided to name their son. Young people will continue to create their own legends, but we'll save those stories for another day. Wolves care for each other as individuals. They form friendships and nurture their own sick and wounded group structures to make communication possible. Knowledge will be passed on from generation to generation through the education of new generations. Wolves and other highly social animals possess and pass on what could be described as culture. A family group can persist for generations or even decades, passing knowledge and information down from generation to generation. Wolves play together in old age, they raise their offspring as a group, and they care for injured companions. There's evidence that they grieve and mourn when they lose a companion. We've also found that some dogs and cats are also used in hospital shelters and nursing homes to comfort residents and patients. So if animals are treated well, respected, and loved, then I think it's right to train them to serve. The man was baffled when he considered that the woman was surrounded by wolves, but the wife and children were not bruised or injured. Wolves generally avoid human interactions unless they become acclimated to people. People, do your part to keep wolves where they belong, in the wild. Don't feed the wolves. Wolves are wary of people. They can lose their fear of humans by becoming used to them. The woman was rescued and taken to a clinic where she was given a reasonable explanation. Later, she told her story to the public. She really wants to see these wolves again one day. Humans also benefited from their presence. For instance, wolves could help them flush out prey or alert them when dangerous animals or hostile tribes were approaching. Wolves also served as an emergency food source when the going got tough. Wolves are sometimes kept as exotic pets and in some rarer occasions as working animals. Although closely related to domesticated dogs, wolves do not show the same tractability as dogs in living alongside humans, and generally a greater amount of effort is required in order to obtain the same amount of reliability. What do you think about what these wolves did?